Well, 1948, it was Palestine.
No, it actually wasn't. In fact, there has never been a nation in that area of the world known as Palestine.
Yeah, he didn't say it was the nation state of Palestine. He said it was Palestine. And it was, and the British Empire and Ottoman Empire agreed and called it Palestine.
First map you see, which is labeled as 1947. The first lie it shows you on this map is it calls it Palestine. It wasn't called that.
Even the guy who birthed the idea of Israel called it Palestine. I would have thought above all things that this boomer, older millennial, would have spent enough time on this earth to understand that there are different ways to settle a piece of land, and not all of them conform to the Western idea of a nation state. The concept of countries themselves, like we know of them today, didn't even formalize until the 18th century. Furthermore, a territory or region full of people that did not formalize themselves into the concept of a nation state or country is not justification that they should be violently colonized. But as all good and faithful empire apologists do, they justify imperialism using imperial laws and imperial logic. Before 1948, the British Empire referred to Palestine as Palestine. Its legal formal name was the British Mandate of Palestine, but it was still Palestine. Whether it was during the Ottoman Empire or the British Empire, it was the same people settling the land.
It was an area of land that they ruled, and it was known as the British Empire. And the first time it was ever divided up and tried to make into a nation, that was Israel.
You tell them, older millennial, our beloved white European settlers who came to violently colonize the Third World were the first to formalize the region into a conception of national identity that they conjured up in the first place. If you watch this guy's entire argument, it all hinges on the dubious logic that because Palestine has never been considered, in the eyes of the empire, a formalized nation state, then for the Palestinians that settled the land, human rights don't matter, and they deserve what they ultimately got, to be ethnically cleansed from their own homes and land. In other words, because the region known as Palestine was considered a satellite of a much greater empire, its people were subjects, not entitled to the right to self-determine, not entitled to human rights. They could be dealt with accordingly at the whims and the mercy of empire. So if the British decided, like they did in 1917 with the famous Balfour Declaration, that they were going to, quote, establish a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, then they were free to do so. Who's to tell them that they can't? Legally, they could. The British owned that land. The people that lived on that land were not consulted about what was going to happen to them, that they were going to be dispossessed of their land and their resources. If Palestinians, the people that settled the land that was formerly known as Palestine, did not accept the newfound arrangement and they resorted to violence, then people could say things like this.
The Arabs revolted against the British and tried to murder all these Jews.
And use it as a pretext for more violence. The British Empire could just crush them. And then they'd be villainized by people like this who only give one side of the story and say things like this.
No, there's a specific reason for each and every one of these fucking changes. And surprise, surprise, every fucking time is the Palestinians' fault.
Imagine trying to revise history so that you could say that the people that were being colonized were the aggressors against the people that were colonizing them. What's outside of this guy's capacity to understand is that he's using imperial logic to justify imperialism. So yes, in the imperial system of empire, with its laws, rules, values, principles, logic, all designed to serve the interests of power, legally, Palestine was not a nation state. But whether Palestine is considered a Western-oriented nation state or an informal territory of people is of no consequence. The same people were living on that land, despite what you call it. You can call it Zimbabwe or Djibouti, whatever. The same people were living on that land, and they didn't deserve to have their land violently dispossessed by colonial settlers of a larger empire that treated them like subjects. The fact is, the people that settled in the region of the world known as Palestine did not deserve to be ethnically cleansed. This is not a complex issue, it is about human rights. No one in their right mind today would try to justify American slavery by saying that it was legal in the 1800s. I would not be shocked to learn that this person justifies the ethnic cleansing and genocide of the Native Americans on the grounds that they were a collection of tribes living in a loose formation of territories. And anyway, it was all legal because in 1830, President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act. And the fact that there was a Cherokee nation which considered itself its own sovereign government, well, that doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is what the United States government thinks. And to the United States government, the Cherokee nation is not a real nation, so we can dispense with that silliness and huddle them into a concentration camp in Oklahoma. People who lack spines and elementary basic morality make these kinds of middle school arguments. You've heard them before. Might makes right. They got what was coming. If slaves didn't deserve to be persecuted, then why were they slaves? If the Native Americans didn't deserve to be genocided, then why didn't they industrialize? If Palestinians didn't deserve to have their land violently ripped from them, then why did they not overcome their position as third-rate citizens stuck in the crosshairs of an empire? If Filipinos were supposed to have their own national identity, then why were they owned by the Spanish and then the Americans? Clearly they were meant to be in that position. Clearly the Americans had every right to colonize that land. They got that land from the Spanish. And what about Hawaii or Alaska or Guam or Puerto Rico? Clearly those weren't their own countries or nation states, so America has every right to colonize those places, right? The Hawaiians and the Alaskans and the Puerto Ricans and the Guamanians and the Filipinos, they all got what they deserved. They all got what was coming to them.
How Palestine, which is depicted in green, had territory in 1917, and as we move through history, that green becomes smaller and smaller.
This diagram is completely bogus. I'll bring you up to speed. Make sure to follow me here for more. Let's go back to 110 AD. Hadrian...
No, let's not go back to 110 AD. Do you want to know why? Because biblical rights have absolutely no status in the world today. No one in the world can say, 2,000 years ago, here's my story of what happened, therefore I have the right to take this land from these people. That is absolutely ludicrous. If you want to make that claim, okay, fine. But then also admit that you are somehow distinct from the rest of the world and international law does not apply to you. I love how this person's whole strategy is to invoke biblical times to delegitimize a map depicting the historical record from 1917 to 1995. That is not relevant. Do you want to know what is relevant? Every relevant international institution, including the UN Security Council, the International Court of Justice, aka the World Court, the Red Cross, which administers the Geneva Conventions, even Israel's top legal authorities all agree that the Jewish settlements in the West Bank are in violation of international law. Let's look at them again a little bit closer. In 1917, Palestine belonged to Palestinians. In 1948, 750,000 Palestinians were expelled by Zionist military forces, who captured 78% of historic Palestine. Thus, the State of Israel is created. In 1967, Israel started a preemptive war with three countries, Jordan, Syria, and Egypt. The Six-Day War resulted in Israel's occupation of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, Gaza, and the Syrian Golan, and expelled a further 300,000 Palestinians from their homes. The UN Security Council has declared that Israel must leave the territory occupied in 1967, and that settlements in occupied territory constitute a flagrant violation under international law and a major obstacle to the achievement of the two-state solution. The EU has emphasized that the only way to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is through an agreement on a two-state solution that ends the occupation which began in 1967. As UN Secretary General has stated, the occupation has fueled recurring cycles of violence and retribution. It is also true that in 1995, the Oslo Accords further broke up the West Bank into three cantons, Area A, Area B, and Area C. These maps depicting the shift in power of Palestine being controlled by Palestinians to Israelis is accurate to the historical record from 1917 to 1995. Furthermore, the establishment of the Jewish supremacist ethno-state of Greater Israel is in direct opposition to international consensus. The international community remains clear in its stance on the occupation and the need for a two-state solution. What do I mean by that? The Arab states, Palestine, the PLO, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, the citizens of the United States, all overwhelmingly around the world agree that a peaceful two-state solution is the answer. And every time this very important issue comes up at the UN, there are two states, but really just one state, that vetoes it. And those two states are the United States and its lapdog, Israel, who must do what Master says. Let's toss aside the implications wrought by a world in which you have one rogue state that is in the minority, and yet it has total veto power over the entire world. In other words, the entire international community is against what is happening in Palestine right now, and has been for decades. And yet it still carries on, because the United States is that powerful. The United States has year after year after year vetoed the resolutions posed by the UN which call for the self-determination of Palestinians. In 1971, Egypt's Anwar Sadat made a peace offer to Israel, which was in full accordance with the UN Resolution 242, which called for a return to pre-1967 borders in the region with security guarantees. The US flatly rejected it. Again, in January of 1976. Syria, Jordan, and Egypt proposed a two-state peace settlement at the UN Security Council in accordance with UN 242. The PLO supported the proposal, and again, the US rejects it.
The Ottoman Empire had control of this region, but it was a non-defined region with no self-governance or borders subject to the laws and rules of the larger empire that controlled it.
Please don't hurt yourself with that reach of trying to justify the ethnic cleansing conducted by the genocidal apartheid regime of Greater Israel by citing the laws and rules of the Ottoman Empire.
There was no national identity because there was never a Palestinian state. It was just a region, like the Rocky Mountain region in America.
This is an absolutely absurd claim to make, and it betrays good old settler colonialism logic, as if the Rocky Mountain region wasn't occupied by indigenous people before white colonial settlers came along and took over. His own example disproves his point.
I am a colonizer, and I am a decolonizer.
The Palestinians are quite literally colonizers. They are the descendants of people who colonized this land that previously belonged to Jewish people all the way up into the early 1900s. See, the Arabization of the Levant, or the region that we now know as Israel, didn't occur until the 7th century AD.
Cam Higby, you're not gonna win this argument. It's funny, what did I say the last time you tried to pull this shit?
Let's go back to 110 AD. Hadrian...
No, let's not go back to 110 AD. Oh, that's right. You wanted to go back to 110 AD. You've already made this point in an earlier video, and I already debunked it, but I will reiterate it to you now. Biblical rights have no status in the world today. No one can say 2,000 years ago or 1,300 years ago, this is my story of what happened, therefore I can ethnically cleanse these people. That is not how the world works. That is an insane position to take. This is why we have established standards in international law. This is why we have international governmental bodies like the United Nations. This is why we have international judicial bodies. This is why we have human rights organizations. And all relevant institutions across the world resoundingly agree that Israel is illegally occupying territories in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank and must return to its pre-June 1967 borders. That is not up for debate. It is what the world consensus is. So you, my friend, are in the minority. And you can cry about it, you can cope about it, you can clutch your pearls and cite archaeological evidence from 1200 BC if you want.
Our back is 1200 BC.
You can talk about the pharaohs.
Indicated by the Merneptah stele, where the pharaoh Merneptah regaled his encounter with an Israeli kingdom during...
You can talk about 7 AD.
Didn't occur until the 7th century AD.
It doesn't mean shit. That is not a justification to ethnically cleanse and virtually genocide an entire population of people. You want to know what is relevant? The International Court of Justice ruling in 2004, which stated unequivocally that the Palestinian people do in fact exist, and as a people, they are afforded the primary right of self-determination. And furthermore, the territorial unit which belongs to the Palestinians is internationally recognized as being the West Bank and the Gaza Strip.
Why did that happen? Well, because Arab empires conquered this region repeatedly and colonized it.
You can talk about the Roman Empire till you are blue in the face. It's not going to change a goddamn thing. The world does not operate according to your version of history. You are not above international law. You are not above the world consensus. 98% of the world agrees that Palestine has a right to self-determine, and its territories are the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. And also 98% of the world agrees that Israel is illegally occupying those territories and should return and withdraw from those territories completely. Every relevant international governmental body, judicial body, and human rights organizations all resoundingly acknowledge the many war crimes and crimes against humanity that Israel has committed and its many numerous operations in raids into the Gaza Strip, which have amounted in tens of thousands of deaths. Citing Pharaoh's tablet is not justifying war crimes. Quit living in fantasy land and join the rest of the real world, please. I would love to see you present this video to the World Court or the United Nations General Assembly and just get laughed out of the building. Because you're goofy. I mean, let's face it, you're silly.
Nixon ordered Cambodian genocide. Clinton sent cruise missiles to Sudan, people died. You gave the orders to do drone strikes. Invaded Nicaragua in '85.